1965, General Suharto carried out a military coup which wiped out the one mass-based political party, sort of a party of the poor, killed hundreds of thousands of landless peasants, opened the country up to Western exploitation. There was total euphoria in the United States. I mean, the New York Times liberal correspondent James Reston called it a gleam of light in Asia. The Times knew what was happening. They described it as a staggering mass slaughter, but just magnificent. And in fact, in retrospect, George Bundy, one of the top planners for Kennedy and Johnson, National Security Advisor, in retrospect, he said he thought that we probably should have called off the war in 1965, the Vietnam War, because the region was inoculated. Indonesia was sound. No more dominoes. Not much point wasting more time and wiping out Vietnam. But there's nothing ridiculous about the theory. That's why it keeps being resurrected. The Mafia principle is correct. If you want to maintain order and discipline, you have to make sure that there's no disobedience, even in the smallest place, and in particular, no successful disobedience. So yes, it's a dominant theme of world order in the hands of the United States, and in fact, its predecessors in imperial conquest.
Que los Estados Unidos tienen que respetar el derecho de los pueblos a desarrollar su economía en la forma que necesita o desea.
Nowhere was the danger of a good example more apparent than in Chile. For most Americans, the date of September 11th has only one possible connotation. Yet, for the people of Chile, the date signifies an older, deeper scar. On September 11th, 1973, the democratically elected government of Salvador Allende was overthrown in a violent coup d'etat. It established a military dictatorship run by Auguste Pinochet, which would last for 17 years, resulting in the torture and murder of thousands of citizens. At the height of the repression, Chile's soccer stadium was transformed into a concentration camp. Among those targeted was a man whose music now plays on this film's soundtrack, Victor Jara.
He was taken to the stadium, where he was a source of strength for his fellow prisoners, singing for them until soldiers beat him to the ground and smashed his hands. In his last poem, smuggled out of the stadium, he wrote, "What horror the face of fascism creates. They carry out their plans with knife-like precision. For them, blood equals medals. How hard it is to sing when I must sing of horror, in which silence and screams are the end of my song." After 2 days, they killed him.
A report of August 18, 1970 by the State Department explained, "We identify no vital U.S. national interests within Chile." Nevertheless, for Henry Kissinger and other major policy planners, Allende represented a virus that could spread contagion throughout Latin America. As an example of this virus in action, one of Allende's first acts was to guarantee schoolchildren a glass of milk every day.
We had no contact with any of the people that carried out the military coup, and therefore the coup that overthrew Allende was done without contact with the United States.
Kissinger was lying. Declassified documents reveal that the coup in Chile was directed from Washington, and that the Allende regime had been under attack even before its inception. A CIA cable of October 1970 reads, "It is firm and continuing policy that Allende be overthrown in a coup." Unlike the other governments we have discussed, Salvador Allende's regime was explicitly socialist, yet it had also been democratically elected. In short, his regime challenged the entire ideological basis of the Cold War. Rather than be taken alive, Allende committed suicide in the Moneda Palace as fascist troops were closing in.
Trabajadores de mi patria, tengo fe en Chile y su destino. Sigan ustedes sabiendo que mucho más temprano que tarde, de nuevo, abrirán las grandes alamedas por donde pase el hombre libre para construir una sociedad mejor. ¡Viva Chile! ¡Viva el pueblo! ¡Vivan los trabajadores!
In stark contrast to what Allende had in mind as a corrective to Chile's economic woes, Pinochet would embrace a radical program of free market forms as theorized by economist Milton Friedman and the Chicago Boys. Friedman described himself as a libertarian with a small L, presenting his philosophy as a more moderate variant of the Austrian school of free market capitalism. He shared with them a vision in which virtually everything is owned. The programs entailed deregulation, wage reduction, attacks against unions, elimination of social spending, and a fire sale of natural resources to transnational corporations. The Western press described the events in Chile as an economic miracle.
Economic policies that were implemented in Chile as a result of the military regime are intertwined. I mean, one cannot analyze the violence without considering the way in which these economic policies sought to be implemented. Today, Chile stands as one of the most unequal countries in the whole region. The polarization between the have and the have-nots have increased dramatically in the last 20 years. Again, as a result of these neoliberal policies or globalized policies that were implemented during the Pinochet regime, which meant the privatization of pension plans, for example, for people who retire, the privatization of universities, schools, the educational system, health, and so on and so forth. So an economic miracle for whom? I mean, that's always the question that I, raise. I mean, when they talk about economic miracle, who has benefited from this economic miracle? I think that's the key question.
Thank you all very much. It's an honor for me to be here to pay tribute to a hero of freedom, Milton Friedman. He has used a brilliant mind to advance a moral vision. We have seen Milton Friedman's ideas at work in Chile, where a group of economists called the Chicago Boys brought inflation under control and laid the groundwork for economic success.
The thesis of the Shock Doctrine is that we've been sold a fairy tale about how these radical policies have swept the globe. That they haven't swept the globe on the backs of freedom and democracy, but they have needed shocks, they have needed crises, they have needed states of emergencies. Milton Friedman understood the utility of crisis. Only a crisis, actual or perceived, produces real change. When that crisis occurs, the actions that are taken depend on the ideas that are lying around.
Milton Friedman was a leading monetarist. He was a professor of economics at the University of Chicago who believed that value came from money, in contrast to those who believe that value comes from human beings, that human beings and human labor is the source of all value. Milton Friedman believed it was money and gold, and therefore by changing monetary rates and doing fiscal policy, he was able to organize an economy. He was a free marketeer. He was a laissez-faire capitalist, a laissez-faire theorist, and that's part of his monetarism. Laissez-faire means let the market decide. Devil take the hindmost. Get as much as you can and run. This negates consumption, it negates health, it negates meeting human needs, while a few profit. This is the theory of Milton Friedman.
My feeling is that there's two different kinds of market fundamentalism. I mean, when I use the term, I use it to mean a deep faith in the power of the market to solve economic problems and even other kinds of social and political problems. I regard it as very naive in that sense. It's almost like a kind of religious faith. The market will solve it, the market will solve it. It's okay. The market will solve it. But they also sometimes think it's benevolent. That the market will not only solve this, but it will somehow solve it in a way that benefits humanity. I mean, to me, of course, it's completely unjustified. The market doesn't give a damn how many people die. The market may solve peak oil by killing 3 billion people. There's nothing here to be worshipping. And it's type 1, market fundamentalism. Type 2 have some kind of affection for the market because they feel that it has, for example, helped them into their positions of wealth and power. The other way to look at it, which is what I usually say, is that they're not actually market fundamentalists at all. They're bullet fundamentalists. They believe in force. And the market will just be one among many things they will use. And the reason I'm bringing that up is because I think they're equally cynical. I think they're equally cynical about market. I don't think they really have any particular affection or romanticism for the market any more than they do for God or something. That the stupid people can believe in all these things, whether it be traditional religions or the market, and that our job is not to accept any of those naive beliefs, but to manage the society for our own benefit and possibly the benefit of others. I really don't know how often they think of themselves as altruistic. In other words, I'm not convinced that the kinds of elites we see in the US at the moment really are market fundamentalists in a very deep sense. I do think their violence and force are more their thing, and that they're quite interventionist, and that they're bullet fundamentalists.
Reaching the homeland during the late 70s and beyond, and culminating in the worldwide financial crisis, the process of globalization would demand free market reforms of virtually every country in the world. Not only did they fail to raise living standards, they resulted in greatly increased misery for the vast majority of the world's people. The escalation of deprivation indicators in Brazil and Mexico, which together account for over half of Latin America's 465 million inhabitants, revealed a miracle at work. Between 1985 and 1990, the rate of child malnutrition in Brazil increased from 12.7 to 30.7% of all children. In Mexico, the purchasing power of the minimum wage dropped 66% between 1982 and 1991. In Argentina, unemployment rose steadily in the 1980s and 90s, from 3% in 1980 to 20% in 2001, while the number of people in extreme poverty rose from 200,000 to 5 million. The economic miracle in Argentina culminated in this.
Well, Grand Area Strategy was developed really during the Second World War, and it continued to develop afterwards in the early stage of the Cold War. This was grand kind of world order planning, and most of the evidence that we have for this and the direction it took came out of the Council on Foreign Relations working group